Jim Stephenson Jr. is a PhD and a citizen researcher that has devoted his life to understanding and studying the hormone D3 as it pertains to supplementation. Now, Jim got into this work after his wife was diagnosed with a condition that the doctor said was going to be fixed by supplementing with high levels of D3. And what they found out, even when adding K2 and magnesium, as I know a lot of people will comment to say that that's the solution, that her health actually got worse. And she really, really did suffer. And so, as a result of that, Jim began studying this hormone in the body, how it works, and all the different metabolites that are created by sun exposure. So, today we're going to dive into this topic even more. I did have Jim on the podcast about 2 years ago. So if you want to go back and watch that episode, and I tried to kind of answer some of the questions, some of the comments that continued to pop up over and over again underneath that video. But I hope you enjoy this episode. And if there are a lot of questions, I'm definitely open to bringing Jim back on for another episode. Make sure to check out his Facebook group and his links down in the show notes. And I hope you enjoy today's episode. If you've been listening to the show for the last few years, you know I'm a huge fan of red light therapy. There are over 10,000 studies now in publication showing the health benefits of red light therapy. And there is a lot of research showing how red light therapy can help to improve skin health. I have been on the fence about trying one of the red light therapy face masks, and I've definitely been waiting to find one that uses the specific frequencies that actually show improvement with skin health. 630 nanometers for red and 850 nanometers for near infrared. And Bond Charge checks off all of those boxes. So I've been trying this mask out for the last month and I absolutely love it. It's super lightweight. It does not make your face sweat and it's very simple to use. All you need is 10 minutes. You can actually use my code Sarah Kleiner, all one word, to save 15% off at Bond Charge. You can use it on any of their products, but I really, really like their red light therapy face mask. And I think it's something that's worth a try if you're looking to naturally improve your skin health. So check it out. Again, use code Sarah Kleiner, all one word, to save 15% over at Bond Charge. Cortisol is a big buzzword these days, and I have made several videos to talk about this topic. But here's the thing. Cortisol is supposed to be nice and high in the morning and then drop gradually throughout the day. And so when people talk about high cortisol being the root cause of weight gain, insomnia, and hormone imbalance, there is a bit of truth to that. But if you don't actually test your cortisol to see what it's doing throughout the day, you don't really know what's going on. And if you take an adaptogen to lower cortisol and it's not actually high, you could have unpleasant results. That's why I am partnering with Cyfox Health to give you an at-home cortisol test that you take throughout the day so you can see what's it doing in the morning, what's it doing midday, and what's it doing again in the evening when it's supposed to be nice and low so that you can get good sleep and have optimal metabolism. If you go to cyfoxhealth.com/Sarah, you can save 20% on your at-home cortisol test. They also have an at-home blood test where you can test over 17 different biomarkers. Again, you'll go to Cyfox, Siphox health.com/Sarah to save 20% off. When it comes to your cortisol, when it comes to your hormones, test and don't guess. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Evolving Wellness Podcast. I'm excited to have Jim Stephenson Jr. here back on the podcast. I think the last time you were here, I was pregnant. So my son is about to turn 2 in a couple weeks. So it's been a minute.
Yep.
And that was an episode when I put it out that immediately there was just so much pushback and cognitive dissonance. And I think that this is a topic that, there is a lot of cognitive dissonance and pushback on this because even in the alternative health space, we still are heavily pushed to supplement with D3. It doesn't matter. And, mainstream doctors just started doing it, but alternative doctors, really functional medicine doctors, a lot of them have really been pushing D3, K2, and magnesium as though it's
Right.
like the trifecta. If you add these three things in, you're going to improve your health. And uh, maybe we can, I know you've been doing some more research, new research since the last time we talked, but maybe we can kind of do a little brief synopsis for people who might be tuning in to listen to you for the very first time.
Okay. Okay. So I guess the biggest issue with the vitamin D thing is that the deficiency isn't real in the first place.
Mm.
They've taken associations that they've created with 2,5-D, which they're measuring in blood. And all this time, they've never developed a test to see how much is in your liver actually stored there because it's the chief storage organ. And that's kind of sad because I know you can read that they know when you're needing a B12 shot that you've depleted 2 years worth of B12 in your liver. And
Hmm.
that's a water soluble. That's an unusual thing for it to be stored there. But somebody went and figured out that there was 2 years worth of B12 in your liver, but they didn't figure out how much vitamin D is stored in your liver for some reason. So they're not calling the 2,5-D they measure in blood storage. They're actually just saying they all agreed that that's a stable marker because it's long half-life because it's bound to the vitamin D binding protein. So it's got about a 3-week half-life. So they use it as their proxy to show a level. And anytime that it's out of range with an association they've made, they say it's the cause of your illness. It's the cause of almost all human illness today if you follow it, and it's just kind of ludicrous scientifically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think it's for me and where I've been in the quantum circadian space, it's a proxy for if someone's not supplementing, it's a proxy for how much they're going outside and how much they are either circadian aligned or not. But if someone is supplementing, I mean, I've seen some really high levels on people that are supplementing just because they think that they have to, and their doctor said, "Oh, your levels are really low. We need to bring these up."
Right.
And, where you got into this whole thing was you had a wife that was very sick and you were told that it was breast cancer that she had. Is that correct?
No, it was just had a DEXA scan that was
Ah,
really poor, said bones of 80 some year old in the 40s. And
okay.
every other diagnosis that was already there or came to pass after that was the cause of vitamin D deficiency
Mm,
immediately. Like I said, it's the cause of, they tell you if you would have only had this level once you're sick, and they're telling everybody to maintain these levels that are all association based.
right.
They're not scientific. And so they put that person on a prescription. Their level was 23
Mm,
and that was NG, so the United States measurement, not nanomole. And the prescription was D2. I think there is a D3 50,000 IU prescription now. Someone showed me an image of it on their phone the other day, but this was D2.
mm,
And the level dropped to 11 on the prescription, and that didn't make sense to me. And that's when I started studying it. There's a couple reasons that could have happened now that I know more about it.
mm,
It's D2, first of all.
mhm,
D2 can make other unique molecules they're not going to check, but also the body will do, it'll ignore vitamin D if it doesn't want it.
mm,
And sometimes that could cause it to even drop lower than it was in the first place.
mm. Yeah, there's so much about vitamin D. I feel like that people don't understand. And what I always tell people is like, we're just measuring one marker. There's literally dozens of metabolites.
Right.
And then no one's measuring the 125. And then even when they do measure the 125, something I didn't realize, I know you're going to talk on Dr. Pugh's podcast at some point because she's staying here with me now in the States. So the time works better. But when they measure 125, what she was telling me, because we did a bunch of lab drawing experiments earlier this year when she was here in April, they have to freeze the 125 right away in order for it to be an accurate measurement from that's what she told me. I don't know if you've come across that research before as well, but
Right.
yeah. Yeah. So you
Yeah,
might
I
get a
have read that.
125. Oh, you have. Okay.
Yes. But when you start going down that rabbit hole, I don't know if that's completely relevant. I read that in
Mm-hmm.
Trevor Marshall's work. If you look now, none of them are freezing it. I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
she found when she did her research.
Quest Labs is the
Um,
only place we could find that freezes it right away because we asked when we
oh,
went to go get it done.
Oh, it'd be interesting to give them a sample and someone that says it doesn't matter whether you
Hmm.
freeze it or not, and then compare the two.
Hmm.
I don't know about all the ways you can separate blood. I can't say whether it's relevant to freeze it or not under certain ways they do it because, that's phlebotomy and then beyond into a bunch of other science. And so I
Hmm.
I can't say, but that it's interesting because nobody's coming out testing low in it to begin with. So you can
Hmm.
imagine if it's actually low because they're testing it wrong, it's
Hmm.
even worse than we think it is.
Hmm. Yeah, so maybe we can explain that correlation because I've always just, I mean, most people are like, get your vitamin D checked. You can get vitamin D panels now with Quest where it'll check like four different markers. But again, there's dozens of metabolites and it's just like we're not really getting a full picture of what's going on in the body. But for basic, like if someone did want to do a 125 and a 25, what kind of information could they gather from that?
Okay, so if they're able to get a four analog or four molecule test, that's probably based on the NIST standard that I saw. I think the epi form of
Hmm.
25D is in there, which would be a good thing. I think one of those probably is the active metabolite,
Hmm. It
and
is.
then probably the two forms of 25D and the D2 and the D3 faction is what I'm guessing. That's worth doing if that's all you can get, of course.
Hmm.
The thing is that we're still in one pathway. We're
Hmm.
in the one pathway they found first. They have added the epi to this pathway, but it's still the first pathway. And when we found the true real pathway, which we'll look at later,
Hmm.
it has a lot of molecules in it, and they called it the alternative pathway. And
Mm.
it didn't get attention because at that time, if you ask me, I'm real cynical, there was already the medical industrial complex ready to embrace that with synthetic molecules,
Hmm.
realizing what the true picture of the steroidogenesis heart of vitamin D really was. Because calling it a vitamin D molecule has really confused the ones we're focused on. And there's tons of molecules that are vitamin D like,
Yeah.
but vitamin D is really like them.
Hmm. Yeah, I've got this image that you sent me that's got the UVB and then it shows pre D3. Do you want me to share that super quick or do you want me to
Yeah,
wait on?
you could put it on the screen and we can
Yeah,
talk about
let's
it for
put
a
this up
second.
for those who are watching on either Spotify or on YouTube. Okay. Can you see
Yeah,
it? Yeah, this is fascinating to me. I love this because
right.
I've tried to explain this so many times to people when they get very myopic about this whole conversation. And maybe you can talk through this just a little bit so people kind of understand what you're talking about.
Sure. Are you able to see my mouse on the screen?
I'm not. Um,
Okay,
yeah, I'm not able to.
that's okay. So at the very bottom of this image here, you see there's an enzyme listed there. It's called
Yep, right here.
CYP11A1 right
Yep,
there.
yep.
So that's a CYP enzyme, one of the P450 enzymes. That was originally named the cholesterol side chain cleavage molecule.
Mm,
So it either makes vitamin D molecules or it makes pregnenolone, which is the base substrate for all the other
sex
steroids.
hormones. Yeah.
So on here, what you see is this is the CYP origination, and then a lot of other enzymes can step in and make other unique molecules. I've found 15 different 25D level molecules. There's only one on here, and it's a lumisterol molecule. And it's just up kitty cornered to that under the L3, the big L3 molecule that's made to the right off of pre D3.
Yep.
Go
Yep.
up and over just a little bit. See,
Mm.
T3 is on one side and
Okay.
L3 is on the other.
L3. Okay, here's
Okay,
L3.
so
Yep.
T3 is tachysterol,
Mm-hmm.
L3 is lumisterol. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the things that D3 progresses to. And then they go on to be substrates and to have their own family of molecules. There's a
Yep.
lot of molecules.
There's all these
So you see
metabolites.
the only 25D on there is that lumisterol one,
Mm-hmm.
25OHL3, right under the big L3 molecule, down just a little bit from there.
Right here. Here we
Yeah,
go.
right in there.
Okay.
Okay. So then what I really want to talk about is I want to talk about what starts without sun on here. So if you come under the UVB molecule and you see the 7 dehydrocholesterol,
Mm-hmm.
if you notice the movement to the left there is not UVB driven.
No.
I'm sorry, to the right, to the right.
Okay.
See, that's the CYP11A1 enzyme again that
Mm,
did that.
okay.
Okay. So that's just your body. Your body can just initiate those molecules in that little circle there. And then the UVB can act on them and make those molecules that are up and to the right from there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you get those made by starting with an enzyme, adding UVB, your body, and then that getting made. But also, your body can change it microsomally and make that 7-DHP there. That's a form of pregnenolone.
Uh-uh.
And then the light can act on those molecules that are made, and then you can make the host of molecules on the far right. What is most important to people is there are sequential changes to get to the molecules that are your sunscreens, your DNA mutation blockers, your cancer fighters, things like that. So, if you look at that list of molecules on the far right there, the one, two, three, four, the fifth one down, 17, 20,
Yep.
right there.
Here we go.
That there's a paper, PubMed paper that people can pull up. Its number is 21228816. And you'll find out that that is a really amazing molecule. It's
Hmm.
an anti-cancer molecule, and you want to get there. If you're constantly cleaning yourself with soap and stuff, you go out and get Sun for Health, you don't
Mhm.
get soiled, you're going to make a bunch of molecules and they're going to change over time. But if
Mm.
you wash them off or if you're using sunscreen, you're not going to get to that end product that you need to be healthy. And so then somebody else is probably going to make a mimicker of that, big pharma.
Mhm.
And they're probably making tons of these on the screen here because these molecules, the vast majority of the first ones made, there's about 15 made at first. They don't go to vitamin D receptors. They go to receptors that were called orphaned at first because we didn't know what molecules went to them, and they're retinoid receptors. So they're called orphaned retinoid receptors, and they're pretty important. And these molecules, all right here, they don't impact calcium, and that's why they got abandoned.
Ah, okay. So just to unpack a little bit and simplify, uh, this is D3. This is what people are taking, is this, right?
Exactly. Right.
This is what we're getting from the sun. And essentially, this molecule here, you're saying is anti-cancer.
Yeah.
So everyone's basically is saying that take vitamin D3, it's going to prevent cancer. There's no cancer prevention mechanism in that just singular molecule, right? We got to get all the
Right.
way over here. And the only way to do that is through sun exposure, correct?
Right, and some microsomal change
Mm,
to the 7-DHP. In fact, I think if you look in the literature, your body can probably start with 7-DHP
mm,
without even that first influence of the
mm.
sun.
Oh,
You know, it
okay.
has other ways. That's the thing. The body has not only multiple ways to get there, it has
Ah,
multiple molecules that can do the same thing,
okay.
you know.
So what are some other, I think we're good with are we good with this screen? Go back to
Yeah,
chatting.
we're good with that.
Okay.
If you
Okay.
start looking at the lumisterols, a lot of the lumisterol molecules, they're your sunscreens and your anti-cancers.
Ah, okay. Okay. So what would be, I don't know if you know this, but what would be some other mechanisms to get to that other pathway would be anti-cancer? Could it be like cold therapy, or is that just something completely, is it nutritional, or what have you found?
No, I don't know about the cold therapy.
Mm,
Actually, that's a good question.
mm,
I know that some of those molecules, they can be viewed as substrates as well.
mm.
They're in honey. Some of
Oh.
those molecules that are on that screen are definitely in honey. And there's some papers that have come out because of the big C. And
Mhm,
when they're looking at molecules that they found to be effective on it, they're not the molecules we're focused on. They're lumisterols and some other hydroxylumisterols and pregnolumisterols. They're not the vitamin D pathway we're in. And that's the problem. Once you go past D3 and you commit to that 2,5-D pathway,
mhm,
that's like you already made something out of your flour. Like you made a saltine cracker, and you can't back that up and make a taco shell or a tortilla. The body lets the D3 progress to L3, which is really kind of like a totipotent molecule
mm.
that can go multiple directions, including back to D3. And L3 is the same way. And it looks like T3 is going to be made in the winter and become a source
Ah,
of previtamin D3. And we're probably making a certain amount of D3. I know that there's a lotion you can put on made out of Tacosterol, and you can go in the low light in winter and it will progress to D3. That's patented.
interesting. Now, have you heard of a mechanism of UVA? Because I know this is UVB that we just looked at. Of you, Carrie, my one of my partners. I know you've been chatting with her, and we have a podcast together as well. Uh, have you seen that there's a mechanism that UVA can also in the winter when there is no UVB in some locations help to activate these similar pathways as well?
Actually, that might be tied to that tachysterol because it has to do with wavelength. That's what it's
Okay,
talking about, and which rotamer. I don't know a whole lot about it, how they turn, and I'll send you that article about
awesome.
tachysterol because it even
Cool.
says that it questions whether or not we can make. Looks like we can make D in the winter. That's what the
Yeah.
paper's premise is.
Yeah, as Carrie's been talking about that for a little bit. So, and I think she had mentioned you coming to chat on our quantum
Yeah,
conversation. So maybe we'll dive into it deeper on that one.
yeah,
But
for
one
sure.
thing you mentioned that I wanted to question was, okay, you mentioned sunscreen could block some of these mechanisms, but then you mentioned washing off with soap after being in the sun. Did you?
Right.
Because I've always told people like if you want to go take a shower after you've been out all hot and sweaty out in the sun, that it's not an issue. But are you maybe they could rinse off with water, but you're saying not to use soap? Can you talk about that? Because I've always told people that's like
Yeah, I,
rubbish.
I've
Like, no,
I've
no.
changed my position on that too. In fact, I
Okay.
used to look at Mercola's post about it and look at what his citations were, and he really didn't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I realize how many different molecules there are and how they're made in sequential ways, and they're not going to probably go into bloodstream. They're going to probably come and rise to the surface. And then there's another set of glands, and I'm going to probably draw a blank on what they are, but they're on the surface. And there's some papers from the 30s talking about how they contribute to D3. And I always thought, if you're thinking of the 2,5-D pathway, that's not going to get harmed by that because that's going to go in deeper, go into the bloodstream. You're not going to wash off your 2,5-D,
Right.
but you are going to wash off those sunscreens that are made out of D3 as you
Oh,
stay
okay.
in the sun.
Okay.
Because they're going to, I would think you could. That's
So
just
if
my
someone's just
theory.
not using any sunscreen, like they just kind of practice safe sun exposure, they don't overdo it. They just go out for bits of time and maybe use the like UV index and Fitzpatrick skin type to kind of calculate this is good time for me. They're not really so much at risk if they want to go get in a cold plunge or take a shower right afterwards for this happening. It's
I,
more
I
with
wouldn't I wouldn't
soap.
think so, but there's those old rules of pits and groin unless you're soiled and stuff like that. We
Mm.
have skin flora. You don't want to overdo it, removing oils and whatnot, and
Oh
especially some
yeah.
of those oils are sunscreens. And I'll
Interesting.
send you some of the papers. They literally call some of the molecules natural sunscreens.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah, there's so
Mhm.
much that we don't know, that we just
Right.
don't understand. And I've been working on an app that kind of can help people estimate their time in the sun. But one of the things I'm not doing in the app that I've been asked to do that I'm like not going to do, and maybe I can reference this video on the website, is tell people how much IU they're collecting, because I don't think that that is just going to vary person to person. Like you can't sit out in the sun for 15 minutes and say I've collected X amount of IU's and then go and look on a blood test a few weeks later and expect your D3 to have gone up by what's in the app. Um, Dr. Sarah and I, again, we experimented with that. And she had been out in the sun a ridiculous amount, like a lot, a lot. She was very tan. And her D3 actually went down by a point. And she had been using the DMinder app and collecting all these IUs, and her D3 went down. And we were like, whoa, so this is all complete and utter
Right.
nonsense. And give it, because that app will also tell you to take um, vitamin D supplements, which I had to get into it with my developer. I was like, no, don't put that in my app. Like, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. We are just using this timer to help people gauge. a safe sun exposure time. And then we're also going to put a million disclaimers in there that they never should override their own intuition because of what an app says,
Right.
and it's not medical advice and all the things, but just as a gauge based on like skin type and body weight, BMI, location,
Right.
UV index, all of that can give you a gauge, but you can't really use an app to tell someone like, this is how much you've collected, so your number should be this. Maybe we could dive into why. I don't know if you have any theories as to why her number uh, might have gone down after all of that. Today's show is brought to you by Upgraded Formulas. They have my absolute favorite magnesium. You can get the best and only clinically studied stabilized nano magnesium supplement on the market from Upgraded Formulas using my code YOGI for 10% off. Did you know that magnesium is actually required for over 800 enzymatic reactions in the body? This clinically studied magnesium has proven to improve sleep quality and energy by over 60%, specifically improving light sleep measurement by 90%, REM sleep by 150%, and deep sleep by 250%. That means more energy, better mood, and deeper sleep. Who doesn't want that? What makes this the best on the market? This specific magnesium is nano magnesium, which means it is easier for your body to absorb and use. In fact, it is absorbed up to 99.99%, which means you'll feel the results instantaneously. A lot of people are quick to talk about the benefits of sunlight, but what gets often missed in the conversation is the benefit of darkness and the importance of protecting yourself from blue and green light after sunset. That is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% off at Viva Rays. Now, you may have seen some of these studies popping up. I call them fear mongering about blue blockers not being effective. And that is a partial truth, because when you use blue blockers that are clear or that have not been tested with a spectrometer to actually block what they say they do, they will not protect your circadian rhythms. And they are not catching those key wavelengths that you need to be blocking in order for your body to be able to repair, for you to make melatonin, which is a master antioxidant. And artificial light at night has been in the scientific literature extensively linked to a host of hormonal cancers, obesity, diabetes, and all sorts of metabolic issues. That again is why I choose Viva Rays as my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms to allow my body to get adequate darkness at night. You can use the code YOGI to save 15% over at Viva Rays, and you can actually trust that they block the frequencies of light that they say they do. Thanks to Viva Rays for sponsoring today's podcast.
No, I would think that, what was her number above 60?
No, her number,
No,
because
okay.
she's like me. Neither of us have supplemented in years.
Right,
But
right,
she lives in the UK, so she has a much lower solar yield than I do. I've been on the 33rd latitude my whole
right,
life, and so my levels with no supplementation, my D3 is usually around a 60 with no supplementation.
right.
She was at like a 25, and then it went down to a 24. And so she was like,
Okay.
"What the heck is going on here?"
I don't know, but I would say that it's interesting that that puts that in that sweet spot of lowest mortality, which is 20 to 24, dropping that point. Mine happens to be 24
Hmm.
also, but that was not nanomole, that was converted, I'm guessing,
Yeah,
right?
that's a US.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I just think that if you look at the bell curve on one of those things I sent you, that's just where everyone turns out to
Mm,
be. Um, I think that's why you see the lowest mortality on it. There's only one of the ones that I sent you that has a bell curve on it, but
let's see.
it's just where people seem to settle naturally. Um,
Let me pull that
uh,
one up for people
there's
because that's what we
one,
are. Oh, this one. This is the one you're talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah,
You
because I
notice,
we're always told like if you have above a 60, and then this is also like telling people to supplement, encouraging people to supplement to get above a 60 that you can't have any disease incidents. But this is essentially saying something totally different, right?
right? So this is those. I sent you three graphs, and these are made by think it's called Grassroots. It's at the bottom there. I sent you three different versions of the same graphs,
Mm,
and I wanted to talk about it because The association, which is a theory, has
Mhm.
become so strong that they actually labeled the chart disease incident prevention by
Mhm.
serum 2,5-OHD. It's like selling you the idea that look at how they broke out the different the people over there on the right.
Breast
That
cancer,
they're
ovarian
telling you
cancer, colon
they've got it down.
cancer.
They've got their theory so
Wow.
dialed
Okay.
in.
MS, falls, fractures, type 1. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Kidney
they
cancer,
have all their
endometrium.
perfect ranges there for you. And if you just hit that, you're magically going to be fine.
Mhm.
But not after the fact. It's a woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Mhm.
You have cancer now if you'd have been there. And
Mhm.
that's really sad because if you take these cancers and you look each one up by itself, you'll find every one of them has a mechanism that's going to block 25 or vitamin D in general
Mhm.
from working in it.
Mhm.
It's there. That's why they're around. That's why they're so deadly. That's why, you worry about them.
Mhm.
Vitamin D is not going to stop them. Though not the pathway
Mhm.
we're focused on. It's
No.
not.
No. No, not the supplement is not going to stop it. I think that's what's important is people, and that's why I brought you back on, is that people still have the cognitive dissonance to think if they take a supplement, they take a hormone, it's going to do exactly what the sun is going to do. To be getting sun exposure is going to be the same exact thing as taking a
Right.
D3 supplement. Because I do think if someone is outdoors and getting adequate sun exposure and has a healthy for where they
Mhm.
live, because I think because like Dr. Sarah, her vitamin D3 will never probably get as high as mine because I'm adapted to living here, and
Right.
this is where I'm in a much higher solar yield. She's in the UK where it's only like a 5 or 6 UV index in the greater parts of summer. So it's just, I think your where you live, your latitude, your location is also going to impact how high you can naturally get your levels. And so my whole thing is like this, you got to take your supplements is a very myopic and even dangerous thing to be telling people globally, because what about someone who lives in like Scandinavia or I have a lot of people that are in, these really, really, really northern climates. I have a lot of Canadians. Um,
Mhm.
and I do see the Canadians that suffer with a lot more autoimmune conditions and a lot more illness, but I think it's literally because they're not going outside because it's so cold. I think that their circadian rhythms are off. I think that they rely a lot more on artificial lighting. I think it's not just this like, oh, your vitamin D level is
Right.
low. I think it's so much more beyond that. And we just are looking at it through this very myopic lens.
Right. Well, and by blaming almost all the human disease on it, they're able to get people to focus on that. And a lot of people, when they find it, they quit looking for anything else. They're satisfied. They found their problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings a lot of placebo relief too,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest with you. And a lot of people will get offended over that,
Very.
but the body and the mind is really powerful. And you can get relief. You can even get biological relief.
Yeah. Well, some of the comments that were on the last conversation we did, I'll try to make sure to put that in the show notes for people as well, because that was a really great conversation. They are saying things like, "What if I take, like I said earlier in the chat, I'm going to add magnesium and I'm going to add vitamin K2, and then I'll take my D3 and I'll be fine." Maybe we can unpack that a little bit for people because that's what I thought when people say, "Oh, it's dangerous to take D3." I'm like, oh, it's because they're not taking K2 and they have low magnesium. So let's
Right.
unpack that a little
Okay.
bit.
So the first thing is that everybody needs to really probably hone in on the fact that there really isn't a deficiency. And the thing that we'll talk about probably later on will
Mm-hmm.
should drive that home. But everybody's relying on the association-based science of 2,5-D, and they're shooting for a goal in that 2,5-D world. And so now they're seeing that, or saying, I should say, trying to put a woke position is how I put it. And I'm not trying to be offensive or anything. If it worked, that'd be great. That'd be a great
Mm-hmm.
woke position to have. Add vitamin K and add magnesium to it. Yeah, magnesium's important. Some people are getting tested. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of different forms of magnesium.
Mm-hmm.
Magnesium's a really complex world in and of itself.
Oh yeah.
And there are specific papers that say that supplementing magnesium has not helped and has even been a little bit detrimental. But when it was from food sources, it helped. And they
Hmm.
say the same thing about vitamin K. K and D are two things that we make. We should probably focus on those avenues for them.
Yeah.
Gut health for the K, stuff like that. But vitamin K going into your gut is identical to vitamin D going in your gut. They're both fat solubles. They're both going to be picked up and shuttled by LDL cholesterol. That vitamin K is not going to do anything towards vitamin D at that time. It's not going to help you assimilate it. It's not going to help you acquire it. It's on its own journey. It's on down the road that vitamin K is going to help with the calcium placement that is driven by the D. And so a lot of people are taking vitamin D. A lot of people know vitamin D increases your calcium intake. And most of those people aren't low in calcium. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of people taking vitamin D for other reasons, not considering the fact that one of its roles is to acquire more calcium. And
Mm.
so if they're not paying attention to their active vitamin D, which is what controls the acquisition of calcium based upon its level, they're not looking at the one marker that's in the axis with PTH and ionized calcium. That's the axis that controls whether you need more. But here's the catch. When you need more calcium, the signal to acquire it in the gut is the same signal that a baby gets in breast milk. You're going to end up with the 125D in your gut. It needs to arrive in your gut to absorb calcium in your gut. Otherwise, you're going to be stripping it from bone. That's the
Mhm.
difference. So raising your 25D level in your blood doesn't have anything to do with your body sending a signal to the gut to absorb calcium. Your body has to do that independently of your focus on your 25D level. And there is a mechanism for your body to do that outside of breast milk for adults. And it's a water soluble form of vitamin D we'll talk about later.
Okay. Yeah, that's the big thing. I was getting pressured. Well, during pregnancy, I was getting pressured like crazy to take vitamin D3, and I never did. And I did keep my levels at a 60 using a Asperity vitamin D lamp and a red light therapy panel pretty regularly throughout my whole pregnancy, and then laying in the sun once the summer hit. And
Right.
I felt great. I felt really good. And my midwife stayed off my back because she was happy with that level. And, oh, are you taking your D3 supplements and your prenatal? I was like, no.
Yeah.
But all the nutrient levels are good. We're testing them out. Everything looks good. But then the pediatrician, of course, we found a pediatrician that doesn't force medical interventions, which is crucial for our family. But I still like to have one for paper trail and just to have one, just to have one. And
Sure.
that was the first appointment. Do you want these medical interventions? No. Okay, great. That's fine. Just make sure that as you're breastfeeding him, you're also supplementing him with D3 drops, especially since you're not giving him any formula because the formula adds D3. So just make sure you're doing the D3 drops. And my husband was like, are we doing that? I was like, no, we're not doing that. So
Yeah.
maybe we
No.
can unpack that a little bit for people, why that might not be the best idea to give baby vitamin D3 drops.
Okay, we're gonna go right into that, the new reality of water soluble vitamin D, as long as that's okay then.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So if I've done a lot of vitamin D research, looked at a lot of early on research and seen a lot of changes over time. And for the longest time, I've had on my list of molecules sulfated forms. In fact, the 13th and 14th forms of 25D that I found were water soluble forms. One was a gluconoride. I don't know if I'm saying it right. The other one was a sulfated form of 25D. Um, so I finally took the time to do a deep dive on sulfated vitamin D, which is water soluble. Sulfated molecules are water soluble. And I found a total of 49 papers from 1962 until this month, this year is the latest paper. And the latest paper is actually a really good one. And I found what I've labeled the progression of stupidity multiple times and talked about for well over a decade. The vitamin D world thought that vitamin D was all about calcium because it was discovered via rickets. And they
Mm-hmm.
fixed everybody with sunlight back then. A lot of people think we went straight to vitamin D pills. We did not. We irradiated the cows, their feed, and the milk, and that's how we fixed it. Later, they decided it was easier to add vitamin D. And then they started adding vitamin D to things. And that's going on almost 100 years now. We've
So we've
had that
been
added
doing
to
vitamin
stuff.
D supplements for 100 years now.
No, the fortification of milk and things like
Fortification of
that
milk.
because of rickets.
And you were saying that they were irradiating the cows. So they were putting the
Yes,
cows out in UVB. So the cows would
right.
have more vitamin D.
Hmm. Right.
Okay. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay.
And then hit the milk and hit their feed before they ate it, like we
Okay.
would our mushrooms,
Oh,
things
okay.
like that. Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. All right. Well, that
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. Okay. And then they were
Yeah.
like, oh, we could save a lot of time and money and just or make more money by creating
Yeah.
a supplement. We could make more money. I think that's what
Right. Yeah, probably. And just,
yeah.
just have concentrated creation of it and then just add it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it moved forward.
Yeah.
So the early science, and I think the earliest paper I put in there is 1962. They were on a journey abandoning any molecule that didn't influence calcium.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the papers, I want to make an important point here. They will be comparing it to D2 and D3 in some of these early studies. The water soluble form of vitamin D will get compared to it. And they'll say it doesn't mobilize calcium as well as D2 or D3. They hadn't discovered 25D yet. Okay. They were
Okay.
just at that vitamin D level, as you could say, D2, D3. And today, we know that D2 and D3, even though they might mobilize calcium in a lab environment, that's not what's mobilizing calcium in us. It becomes 25D first and 125D, and then that one is involved in mobilizing calcium. So there's studies in the first place of comparing this one mobilizes calcium and this one doesn't. In the human body, that doesn't bear out. Neither one of them was going to mobilize calcium. One is in a pathway that could later mobilize calcium. But this was enough to abandon molecules that didn't mobilize calcium. So water soluble vitamin D got completely abandoned. But first, they figured out how to test it. There was a lot of scientific argument of whether there was a lot of it in there or not. Were they finding it right? They actually figured out exactly how to find it. And then right about that time, they said it's completely worthless and they abandoned it.
Mm.
Yeah, and they found there's tons of it. There's a lot of it in there. There's way more of it than there is the fat soluble form of D in there. But it doesn't matter because it's not anti-rachitic, I think is the term. And so it got abandoned. And even today, if somebody were to jump off of and not read my paper, they might go and look up some of these molecules and see, oh, they said it's anti-rachitic and it's worthless and not realize, you know, we need some of those molecules. We need molecules that aren't going to cause hypercalcemia in us. We want those kind of molecules for our babies. And the early studies were looking at human breast milk and cow's milk, things that, like I said in my paper, really matter. And so we abandoned all of that. And then they found the vitamin D receptors and they found the 25D and later found the 125D. And we've been focused on fat solubles ever since with that. And then there's some targeted research into sulfated vitamin D. And if you go and look at that, they've finally gotten back to figuring out how to test it again. So, it took 20 years to abandon it, 20 years to perfect testing it again. And the reality is that there's way more of it in the breast milk than there is the fat soluble. Sulfates are how we store steroids.
Mm.
DHEA is stored that way. Estrogen is stored that way. It's a stable storage molecule. In the piece I wrote, there's 14 papers saying it's a storage, it's a reservoir, they feel. Well, it's time to say it is. We don't say the other one is, and it's always more abundant. So the 25 sulfated D is always more abundant in everyone, not just in breast milk, not just in pregnant women, in everyone. There's
Mm.
more sulfated 25D than there is unsulfated fat soluble.
Mm. Interesting. So, I mean, nothing on the podcast. Hopefully, people know this is medical advice. So, I really want encourage people to dive into this research on your own and make your own decision about what is going to be best for you and how you want to interpret this. But hearing that, it doesn't make sense that we would need to give a baby any D3 supplements or us as well. Would you say?
Yeah, I would agree. I already felt that there wasn't a deficiency. In fact, one of the ways they trick people is to tell them in winter we have a deficiency.
Yes.
When if you read a paper about vitamin D, they're all really clear and they tell you the biological activity comes from 125D. And
Right.
then they will do a bait and switch, and then they will point at a deficiency in
D3.
25D
Yeah.
based on a man's goal, man set goal. And I say that because a man was involved in setting. I'm not being sexist. It was Dr. Hollick was deeply involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
And they got that raised, and they didn't raise the active form, telling you it was never low. So, we're really just using associations to drive science
Mm-hmm.
that and medical behavior, really. And it's just never really been proven. And anyone that's savvy in molecules, like the people that wanted to maybe make it work with vitamin K and maybe make it work with magnesium,
Magnesium.
know that that chart that we just showed, incidence disease prevention by 25D level, we could make some pretty nifty charts with vitamin A and vitamin C
Mm-hmm.
and vitamin E and
Yeah.
other zinc. Or
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee there are people massively deficient in certain molecules, and we could make all kinds of cool charts and then break it out by cancer types and just act like it's such a fact. You
Mm-hmm.
know, people really buy that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
read one paper that tells you 125D is doing it. Well, show that low too. If you're going to say there's a deficiency, show that it's not throughput to the active form that is the goal. You
Right.
got to do that. That's step one. And a lot of people really don't they have to be turning a blind eye to that?
Oh,
It's
definitely.
that just
Well,
makes
people
sense.
just really want to be told what to do. I understand. Like they have children and jobs and busy lives. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, I just want to know what I should do. And then based on that, like I'll take XYZ supplements or eat XYZ foods and then go on with my life. I think that's the state that a lot of people are in. And this is just one of those things where I have seen, and I know you've talked about this quite a bit, that people do take the advice to take the D3 supplements, even with K2, even with magnesium, because I know we'll get that in the comments, and it goes poorly with thyroid issues, with so many different glands in the body having issues with overdoing the supplements or even just taking what's been recommended by their healthcare
Right.
practitioner. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit because one of the comments I probably got over and over and over again in our last video, I'm sure I'll get it here, is I have autoimmune condition. I'm very sick. I have XYZ chronic illness. And since I've been taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D3 plus K2 plus magnesium, I feel so much better. It's saved my life. You know, how, what do you say to that? Because I did get quite a few of those. It's a steroid hormone. I know that. So it can bring a level of suppression, but maybe, yeah, maybe you can jump in and tell me what you think about all of those comments, people that say that.
Well, we've already talked about the placebo effect, which is very real. We see that in the chemo trials and stuff like that. So, but beyond that, there's a steroid effect. It is the most powerful naturally occurring steroid in our body, 125D, that's not getting measured. So you could have that. And then there's no telling what it's doing in the cascade of other events. How some people say they get worse when you find the right treatment, Herxheimer reactions and
Mm-hmm.
things like
Mm-hmm.
that, if I said
Mm-hmm.
that correctly.
Yeah.
Well, imagine that your thyroid and your other things in your body, adrenal glucocorticoid, let's say, it makes a lot of antimicrobial peptides, just like the vitamin D system does. And so, if you have too much active vitamin D and that system shut down, and then it takes out your adrenal system and you're not fighting with antimicrobial peptides, you might start to avoid a negative reaction of a die off, a kill off. You might stop a healing that was impacting you in a negative way because sometimes healing, you do feel bad. I'm not saying those people were necessarily healing before. It's hard to say. They add so many things at once, and I get that. You want to get well, you want
Mm-hmm.
to figure it out, you read some stuff, you want to try it. But it's not working in studies. That's the reality of it. The only thing that's driving the behavior to think it should work is the associations drawn with 25D. Like I said, if you do any kind of targeted research that they're saying it's going to work on, you'll find out it's not going to work on that in the deeper science. specifically prostate cancer. It's not going to work in breast cancer. It's not going to work in, there's different forms of those estrogen dominant, not estrogen dominant. But by and large, uh, tumors are not going to express vitamin D receptors if that's an avenue by which they're going to be killed. That
Mhm.
just, that goes without saying. We wouldn't be 1 in 2, 1 in 3 people having cancer today based upon starting the, 1900s with hardly any.
Right.
That's not realistic. So this vitamin D thing is not working. People need
Mhm.
to realize that. There's some people that think they feel better when they do it, but there's way too many other molecules that really do stuff, and it's about time to get on those. All the molecules I saw that were effective in COVID, we could make, manufacture, and give to people directly. They're natural molecules you're supposed to make. You know, why can't we do that? Because there's
Yeah.
no money.
What about sun exposure too? I mean, how many people are just, because I saw Harvard put out a paper not super long ago. I think it was during the pandemic, of course, that they dropped in this paper that said uh, D3 supplementation is the same benefits as being out in the sun. And they made this big deal about it. And I'm like, what? Like
Right. Well,
don't risk it. Just take the supplement. And I'm like, how many people are going to experience worsening health from taking that advice? Because I know I feel better when I have a tan. I know when I can go outside, even in the middle of winter, if I can go outside, I still feel better than staying indoors. There's so many more
right.
benefits to sunlight than just the vitamin D3 to begin with. But yeah, that's just a common message that's out there, honestly.
Right. Well, think about the scientific position of going in the sun. The scientific position of going in the sun is still one where, as soon as it progresses past D3 to L3 or T3,
Hmm.
it is inert, which is not true at all. That's when you start making other really amazing molecules and stuff.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering if you had looked at some of the research that essentially said that melatonin can dock to the vitamin D receptor in the body. And that was a possible mechanism of how we didn't really need to supplement in the winter. We needed to focus more on making melatonin, focusing more on darkness, more on cold, more on healing, more on repair in those darker, colder months. I was wondering if you had looked at any of that research at all.
No, did you say that it docks in the vitamin D receptors? No, I'll
Melatonin.
definitely
Yeah.
look that up.
Yeah.
I'm wondering which one it docks in because there's two. There's the nuclear and then there's the membrane one, and they're distinctly different proteins. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I will definitely look at that.
Yeah, I think it's Deanna Minich has done the research on that. Um, she talks about a lot of supplementation also. That's why I haven't necessarily gone deeper into her stuff, but that she did make
Right,
that discovery. So I always thought that was really interesting of like, huh, in wintertime, everyone thinks like, oh, I got to keep my levels up. I got to keep my levels up. But maybe we are meant to have some seasonality in our bodies and go into more deeper
right,
repair states in the wintertime, and meant to not have super high D3 levels. Because I even want,
right,
I live here where it's pretty, it's 33rd latitude. So we've got UVB year round, even though the index doesn't really get up super high in the winter. But I occasionally will use like a UVA, UVB lamp with red and near infrared, all of it combined into one. And it does definitely give me a mood boost and I feel better and I feel more energized. Um, and my friend, Dr. Sarah, who's here, she's kind of stolen my lamp that I have right now.
mm,
And she's like, I'm trying to keep her from taking it back to the UK with her in her suitcase, but she thinks it's really wonderful. But
right.
how I know you've got some stuff in your Facebook group where people kind of have their own DIY lamps. What are your thoughts, just so people, if they're going to ask, like, okay, so I don't take supplements, what do you think about the sun lamps in the wintertime?
I think light is wonderful. I have my own theory that maybe if you're really healthy, you don't need it, and you do run a risk with your circadian rhythm. But there's a lot more light than just the UVB light too
Oh yeah.
that people are using now, of course. Um, and I think people should test it and see what it does for them and stuff. It's
Hmm.
definitely not going to hurt you. You could burn yourself, yes.
Oh
You can
yes.
hurt yourself by burning, but outside of that, there's we just don't pay real attention to what light can do for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's way too discouraged. I was reading something recently about there's a form of scarring they rate in melanoma scarring.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading about the scarring in the people that had melanoma, and they try to tell you that UV in general drives that melanoma, but
Mm-hmm.
the people that had the worst scarring from the UV exposure
Mm-hmm.
had the least case. They were better off. They did better. The people that had the least scarring from the UV that had melanoma did the worst.
Wow. So
So
basically, people that were indoors that got melanoma, they were not getting a lot of sun
right,
exposure. They had worse outcomes than people who did have melanoma but had gotten
right,
ample UV exposure, right? Am
yeah.
I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, and somebody who's familiar with melanoma will probably know the form of scar, and it actually has a term, a name, and I'll write something on that in the near future about it
Mm,
because I found it really interesting.
yeah. What are some of the negative health outcomes? Because I know, like I've mentioned, you've got a Facebook group where a lot of people come with a lot of questions, and you have some really good moderators in there that are very helpful at bringing people back down to earth. Because it's, like I said, kind of an emotional topic because it's one of those things
Right.
we've just been told by everyone that you got to supplement. Um, what kind of health conditions have you seen people run into when they're doing a lot of supplementation?
Most people have multiple autoimmune diseases, you know. There's
Mm,
always you got your thyroid issues and stuff like that. Just poor health in general. A lot of people haven't even been able to run labs or don't even have any idea what their illness is yet. They
mhm,
just know they're sickly.
mhm.
You see the fibromyalgia is really common, chronic fatigue, osteoporosis, those kind of diseases, MS, of course. Um, but at the heart and the beginning of it for most people, I think the warning sign is when the thyroid starts to go awry,
I was going
especially
to
if
say thyroid is
especially
the
if you
biggest one.
maybe you had a baby and everything was fine before the baby, and post baby fertility starts to become kind of an issue for you, and you see your thyroid went south
Mhm.
on you, because that's usually the first thing that the excess 125D is going to go and take.
Mm,
You had a 40% spike of it when you were pregnant.
okay.
So, if you start to have a downfall, the chemical warriors for which there is no immunity that the vitamin D receptors make are also made by other systems like the glucocorticoid and the adrenal. They make antimicrobial peptides. So if you lose the function of the vitamin D, you lose all that. And then if it steals those other systems, you lose their function and their immune parts that most people don't even know they do.
Mm, wow. Yeah, I've seen a lot of thyroid issues from over supplementation, and they never really correlate it until I'm like, oh, how much are you supplementing with vitamin D? And they're like, oh, tons. And then it's like, yeah,
Right.
because is it the calcium can essentially kind of block the gland? Is that correct? Or what kind of mechanism is it
No,
that?
what it is most of the pathogens that are still around today have
Mhm.
found a way to block the action of vitamin D. So the
Mm,
strain, let's say, of them that's around today possesses something, an antigen, a way to block mRNA. So leprosy, for example,
mm,
oldest human disease, it blocks the mRNA that the vitamin D system could use to make the antimicrobial peptides. So it blocks it. Here's a really good thing to think about. um, the vitamin D receptors expression is, uh, canceled, nullified in a dose-dependent fashion by caffeine, which is really interesting. In fact, maybe that was at play in that 1 point drop in the
mm.
25 to 24 caffeine,
Okay.
maybe because the expression of receptors also sets the sensitivity. So
Okay.
when there's not very many vitamin D receptor systems, or receptors, the system will pull back vitamin D that's available for them.
Mm,
So it makes sense that you would stop expressing vitamin D receptors in the presence of caffeine, because caffeine in reality is an insecticide made by plants. Okay. And the vitamin D receptor system in us is actually most related to detox system. So it probably would see caffeine as something that needs to detox, so the caffeine has a way of blocking it. So blocking its expression of receptors.
Well, no, she was drinking a lot of coffee because my husband drinks
Yeah.
a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
Also, also has a low vitamin D, my husband, but um, yeah, I know she doesn't drink a lot of coffee, but then she comes here and visits and drinks a lot of coffee. And that's interesting because when I was getting pregnant, like I quit coffee for about 2 years while I was trying to get pregnant, and then I did get pregnant. I didn't drink any coffee, and my vitamin D just naturally from sunlight was like getting just really like going up, 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 without supplements. And then this summer, laying out in the summer all summer long, I started off in April with like a 45, which I'm fine with. I didn't use any sun lamps or anything all winter long. And then now I just measured it in August and it's a 60. And I was like, that's all. It went up. I'm really tan. I've been out in the sun so much. I know
That's
it's
the limit though.
uh,
That's the
I
limit of the
feel
body
really good. I
naturally.
feel really good, but it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
when I was pregnant, it went up so much more because it had started out at like a 30 and I got it all the way up to like something like 70. I mean, it went up really high before pregnancy. Then as soon as I got pregnant, it dropped down to 60 and
Right.
wouldn't go above a 60 once I got pregnant.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's just interesting. And I mean, also, it's being used by the cells, it's being stored in the liver. It's not just like free floating in the blood,
Right.
correct?
Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
stored even in bone. It's stored
Yes.
even in bone, you know.
Yes.
And I wanted to talk a minute about, you were talking about the thyroid and all the
Mm-hmm.
thyroid issues and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So one thing you have to consider with vitamin D is how it's picked up in the gut. So a
Mm,
lot of people are going to take a bunch of vitamin D and it's going to need the LDL cholesterol shuttle.
mm,
And it's also going to leave 7-dehydrocholesterol in your body not being turned into vitamin D3. Okay.
mm,
So there's more 7-dehydrocholesterol substrate left to become cholesterols. And then you're going to force your body to have a bunch of LDL cholesterol to shuttle. And then you're probably going to get yourself flagged for LDL cholesterol.
mm-hmm.
And what's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen then? You're going to go on statin. And what's a
Oh.
statin? Statin's another form of vitamin D molecule. And
Is it?
statins are known to steal the thyroid just like active vitamin D. There's science on it. Grimes did a bunch of work on it. He says they're just forms of vitamin D molecules.
Oh,
So
wow.
by taking vitamin D, you may herd yourself into a statin world. And a
Oh.
minute ago, I said that the vitamin D receptors are in the detox world. And
Mm-hmm.
that's actually really important because a lot of times people are taking prescriptions that are going to cause active vitamin D to be created, but not with a vitamin D CYP, with the 3A4 one that does 60% of all the prescription drugs. So
Mm,
that's going on in a lot of people. And so there's going to be a lot of battling in the body for receptors and carriers and enzyme
mm-hmm.
substrates and enzymes. And so once you've got anything added to your body that isn't natural, and there's actually, you might even need to know what some of the natural things you're doing are and their influence on CYPs, like grapefruit's an issue with certain CYP
Oh,
enzymes,
really?
you know.
Oh.
So there's a lot there. And so any prescription drug is going to have been designed to be number one for its enzyme. And so if you find the right thing on down the road, or if you already had it, it might get displaced when you get on a prescription. So you got to always consider, am I 100% natural? If not, maybe I should look at what enzyme. And it's crazy because 60% of drugs, it doesn't matter what it is. I could have athlete's foot and Lyme disease, and I don't know, or any other number of things. And all three of my prescriptions might be racing to have the 3A4 enzyme and be activating 125D in my body and me not really understanding what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just people are like we mentioned in the very beginning, they're just kind of taking this very myopic view on the whole topic. And yeah, it could be to their detriment. So you've got a lot of great resources for people. You're really active in your Facebook group where you're constantly posting studies. And then again, you've got people that come in that really just want to learn and they really want to understand this. And you've got some good admins that also help people in there. What
Right.
else did you want to talk about? Anything else today, or should I lead people to that Facebook group? I know you're going to be talking with a lot of my colleagues in the future as well.
Right. I would just say that that piece that I just put out about sulfated D is going to be the biggest thing that people are going to need to look into. It's definitely going to work out to be the storage form. It should get people to realize there's not a deficiency in the 25D world that we're focused on, because the 25D sulfated form is more abundant and it doesn't have a seasonal variation. It's not impacted by supplementing. It has the exact affinity to the vitamin D binding protein as the fat soluble, carried in blood the same half-life.
Hmm.
There's sulfated forms at every level of the metabolism they're focused on. There's sulfated 7-dehydrocholesterol, there's sulfated D3, there's sulfated 2,5-D, there's sulfated 125-D, and they are made from their counterpart and then they return to their counterpart as needed with
Got it.
separate enzymes for each change.
Got it.
It's a perfect system. If you would ask somebody to sit down and design that system, that's what it would look like. And when you see the breast milk profiles, it's unreal. Out of a liter of milk, 1,000 IU of vitamin D, but 950 of it is the water soluble, and just the tiniest bit, like 5% of it is fat soluble. And that's all they're going to tell you have in your breast milk. And that's why they're telling you to give your baby D3,
Right.
because they're only acknowledging 5% of what's in your breast milk.
Yep. Sounds about right with, I mean, just basically the way that our allopathic medical system works, period, is we're really only
Right.
getting about 5% of the information, period.
Right. Well, you wouldn't be a patient, or you wouldn't need help if you had the real picture. If you knew that there was another 95% there, you wouldn't be, yeah, it changed the dynamic of everything.
Mm-hmm. Agree, 100%. Well, Jim, this has been really wonderful, and I'm excited to share this with my community. I'll make sure to link your group, and I think you might be coming to talk with me and Carrie at some point. So everybody stay tuned for that. And
Right.
yeah, as always, such a pleasure to chat, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Evolving Wellness Podcast. Just a quick little reminder, this is not medical advice nor meant to be taken as a substitute for working one-on-one with a healthcare practitioner. And if you enjoy the show, please head on over to Apple or Spotify to leave the show up to a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, please leave us a like, leave us a comment. I really appreciate you for being here, for listening to the show, and your support means the world to me as I continue to try to pull guests from around the world to bring you informative content to empower you to make decisions about your own health. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.